Okay, hello folks, can you hear me? Can you just make a note in the chat box and just reassure me that we are in fact broadcasting live? Yay, thank you folks. Okay, in which case let's get started. So, it is in fact July. It's the second Wednesday of the month. It's Webinar Wednesdays, and this month we're looking at developing your HR and training plan. And we've come to sort of the end of this year, a whole year now of webinars, and it's been a really interesting and exciting year for us, and we just thought it would be really nice to leave you with something to sort of close down this year and look at a topic that supports you in moving forward in terms of your role and responsibility for HR. And so the focus of today's session is very much about helping you in the hurly-burly of school life, the weird and wonderful world of education, to help you in thinking about future planning around HR and thinking about those next steps and being able to plan accordingly. As usual, it's myself, Summer Mesa, and Liz.
Good afternoon, everyone.
And we've got you here for the next sort of half hour, 45 minutes or so, and so we'll take you through these themes. Just bear with us a moment, we've got some background noise coming through, so we're just trying to rectify that now. But let's make a start and have a look at what we are going to cover. So in this session we're going to look at HR planning, and I suppose the first thing to say is that HR planning is an umbrella term for a number of HR activities, and I'd be really interested to know, Liz and I would be really interested to know and get a sense of what does HR planning mean for you and your particular schools and the activities that you undertake. So if you could just make use of your chat box, so really early interaction in this session, if you could make use of your chat box and just let us know what HR planning means for you and your work within your schools. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to share your thoughts. Keyboard's tapping away furiously. Okay, so we've got a suggestion here, thinking about people resourcing, thinking about staffing issues, thinking about induction and planning that for new employees. Performance management is another suggestion, thinking about staffing structures. Looking at capability, performance. Oh, you're well away now. Okay, capability, so linking in again with the theme of performance management. Again around staffing structure, planning for the next year ahead. Also thinking alongside that in terms of induction needs, that links back to the other suggestion around induction. Employee relations, so thinking about contractual information, I guess there we could link that to terms and conditions, thinking about pay and reward, thinking about your offer as employers. Yes, see, benefits, pension, salaries. Absence planning is another suggestion there, so knowing that you've got maternity on the horizon, how are you going to resource that particular role, function within schools during that period. Accounting for sickness absence, compliance issues, learning and development, a whole host of things there, and quite nicely to sort of bring us to an end there, thinking about employer branding and absolutely thinking about your offer as employers in terms of attracting and retaining employees. So that's absolutely the sorts of things that we're going to cover today. So great that we have a common sense of HR planning. So we're going to take you through the planning process, and we're going to give you a helpful framework to think about that and to support you in the activities that clearly you're already undertaking. Going to think about helping you to map current capabilities and future requirements with a view then that you're able to identify and look to close that gap and develop strategies around that. I'm sort of moving quite quickly through the agenda there as I'm talking. We'll then look at thinking about the planning and implementation of change and some issues there, because if you're planning forward and there are new initiatives, new policies, new procedures that you're bringing on board, you'll need to think about planning and implementing those changes. We'll also give a sense of key HR activities at a glance, a bit of a ready reckoner or a bit of a checklist just to help you as a bit of a reminder of the sorts of HR activities that you'll undertake. Be thinking about undertaking on a monthly, termly, annual basis. And I'm really excited to be able to introduce you to our new SPS HR Health Check. This really is an advanced preview, so you are a well-placed group having joined us on this webinar today, so you're going to get an advanced preview of what we've got on offer for you come the new year. So let's start then. So what is HR planning? So firstly, it's about, as you've sort of identified in terms of some of the activities that you've mentioned, it's about having an eye on what's going on now. Where are you now? Where are you now in terms of recruitment? Where are you now in terms of your ability to retain staff? Where are you now in terms of your staffing structures, skills complements, your approach to training and development, and linking that to an understanding of the internal and external context. So internal context might be things like budget issues, it might be things like your school development plan in terms of aligning your HR activities with where the school is wanting to go moving forward in terms of working towards improved outcomes for the children and young people within your schools. In terms of linking it with the external context, well, a key piece of information that was afforded to us this week was the government's update on proposed provisions for pay come September, so having an eye on the external context as well. Obviously things like changes to education policy, so there's been changes to curriculum, changes to certainly secondary provision, there's been some changes to the requirements around early years provision, particularly in terms of requirements for managers of early years settings in terms of qualifications, in terms of adult child ratios, those sorts of things that you'll be keeping mindful of or want to be mindful of in terms of being able to understand what that means for your provision and be able to plan accordingly. So it's all about being able to support the school's goals and the operational needs, and very much a sense of wanting to have the right people, so again linking to your thoughts around recruitment with the right skills, linking to induction, ongoing CPD, development, capability issues, performance management, etc., in the right roles, and being able to make use of that skill, those skills and experience and your staffing complement in the right way. So they're in the right roles, in the right place and at the right time. So again, thinking about not only strategically in terms of what you need for the school going forward, but also perhaps on a more short-term basis as those needs change or as emergencies hit. So perhaps long-term absence that can't necessarily be forecast, although you could look to forecast some temporary provision arrangements, but those ad hoc things that come about and making sure that you've got those skills around in the right place at the right time. And then also in terms of HR planning, as I've said, wanting to plan for change and thinking about remaining flexible. Certainly from a HR theory perspective, a lot of the discussion at the moment is around agile businesses, agile workforces, and being able to be flexible and respond to those changing needs. Okay, first thing we're going to look at then is the planning process, and Liz is going to take you through a little framework, a quick framework, and as we go through this will sort of form the backbone of this next session, and we'll talk you through what that looks like.
Yeah, so clearly with HR planning potentially there's an awful lot to think about and an awful lot to factor in. So how do you manage that? How do you manage that planning and that thinking process? So we've got a model on screen that you might want to consider. It's very much a cyclical model for the HR planning process, and it's something that as a school you may choose to do on an annual basis, a termly basis, or ad hoc as you need to address HR issues and manage HR changes. So as you can see, it's a 5-point cycle and working round from 12 o'clock clockwise. The first stage of the process would be thinking about your future requirements, so forecasting what's coming up on the agenda that you need to be aware of as a school. The next step in the process, looking at what your future challenges are to relate those to the current capabilities of your school, your staff team. What strengths, weaknesses, skills, abilities do you have? So that assessment process. Then, as Summer said previously, you'd be looking at closing that gap, so undertaking a gap analysis. How do we get from where we are to where we want to be, using the skills that we've got in our staff, and also developing skills or recruiting people to match or meet that skills gap. The next stage would be to look at what HR strategy you might need to put in place to close that gap. There's a number of initiatives you could think about around recruitment, around restructuring, around reward, employee recognition and training, and we'll touch on those in a bit more detail later. And the final stage in the wheel is the planning, implementation and the evaluation. So making those changes happen and also keeping an eye on how successful they are, how are they bedding in, evaluating if the HR initiatives you're putting in place are bringing about the results and the outcomes that you're seeking. And as you can see, that's very much a cyclical process that would be ongoing. It never starts, never ends, it just rolls on term to term, year to year. Okay, so looking in a little bit more detail about a couple of aspects of that cycle. Firstly, thinking about future requirements. Obviously, in a school setting, your key planning document is your school improvement plan. So this sets out your agenda and your priorities as a school. So when you're thinking about your future requirements and how your HR provision can meet those, the school improvement plan would perhaps be your first go-to document. Also, when you're thinking about future requirements, you're going to need to have an eye to your budget position. So what's going on financially for the school? Are you in a position where you have a flat budget, a contracting budget? Do you have particular pots of funding that may be coming online or ending? So what budget position are you in to enable you to achieve the HR changes that you're looking for? The other thing you might want to be mindful of is what's happening with your pupils. So if you've got a flat role, an increasing role, a declining role, have you got a change in the profile and the needs of your student population, and how might this impact on the staff and the skills of those staff that you're going to require going forward? As someone's already touched on, you'd also want to be thinking about any legislative change on the horizon or changes in the educational landscape that are upcoming, and make sure you're not just looking internally at what your school needs, but also externally and what might impact on you as an organisation. And if you want to look at those future requirements in a little bit more detail, there's an exercise you might want to undertake known either as a pestle or a steeple analysis. And if you were to Google that and have a look online, it's a framework whereby you would work through and think about how various external changes might impact on your school. And certainly it's something within KCC centrally senior managers do, just to make sure that their thinking is in line with what's going on the external horizon. So that's thinking about future requirements, but what about current capabilities? Well, obviously there's a number of things you might want to have on your radar when you're thinking about that. Firstly, the leadership and management capacity of your senior SLT team. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What are their development needs? And then more widely, you'd probably want to be thinking about the skills, knowledge, the abilities and behaviours of the wider staff team. So again, any particular gaps in the abilities that you have in school to meet these future requirements. Thinking specifically about HR, it would always be helpful to have a look and do an audit of your current HR policies and practices, just to make sure they're fully compliant, up to speed, up to date. And if you are going to have to make staffing changes, you've got the right tools in place to manage those changes. And another tool you might want to look at, if you want to look at the capability of your school in a bit more detail, is something called a SWOT analysis. And that's looking at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. So thinking about your current position, the current capabilities of the team you have in place, and what strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats might impact on them. Okay, so moving round the wheel, the third stage in the wheel is the gap analysis and closing that gap. So I guess this is really a series of questions you need to ask yourself once you've looked at your future requirements and assessed your current capabilities. There's several questions you might want to kind of pose. So are staff deployed in a way that will meet our future needs? Do staff have the skill sets that we need going forward? Are our current HR policies, practices adequate for future needs? Are they useful tools to help us manage any change we need to make in our staffing? And then what staff changes will we need to make in light of future requirements and current capabilities? And clearly, once you've done this process, you could end up with quite a long list. And then it would very much be a case of working through and identifying your priorities, remembering you can't achieve everything. So identify what are the critical changes you need to make, and what HR initiatives would you need in place to achieve those changes.
Yeah, and prioritise the big wins as well, what's going to have the biggest impact, because as Liz says, you're not going to be able to do everything on day one, so focusing on what's the most significant for you as a school. And in terms of that, developing HR strategies, let's look at that in a little bit more detail now. So there are a number of things that you might be looking at as part of your staffing, and what this diagram here is looking to illustrate is that, of course, everything that you do within the school is going to draw back to those priorities within your school improvement plan or school development plan, as I know some schools refer to it. And so that's going to set the direction for the school sort of year on year. And within that, it will drive approaches to teaching and learning. It will, of course, finance will need to be aligned to that in terms of funding initiatives within the school improvement plan, and clearly link back to staffing, which is where we're focusing today in terms of HR. So in terms of staffing, in terms of HR then, and strategies and initiatives that might be appropriate for you to think about, we're going to talk to you today a little bit about workforce planning and what that looks like and how that can help you. And certainly from your feedback in our earlier exercise, that's something that you are looking at. Succession planning as well, so identifying talent, identifying talent pools and being able to grow your own staff and leaders, and certainly that's something that's particularly important, I think, going forward, and linking back to that, having an eye on the external environment. And a lot of the discussion at the moment, very, very topical this, in terms of the decline in teaching numbers. And so opportunities to be able to develop staff in-house, to think about the deployment of your staff, to think about succession planning, particularly for key critical roles within the school, is going to be all the more important as we go forward. Other strategies are going to be recruitment and retention, so thinking about your employer branding, thinking about what you offer as an employer. Some of you may well have heard the phrase employer of choice. You'll be wanting to be a school of choice within your local communities, but also looking to be an employer of choice. Apologies, bit of a technical issue there. The screen went blank. Hopefully you're back with me. Somebody just make a note in the chat box and just give me a little bit of reassurance. That would be lovely. So yes, thinking about workforce planning, thinking about succession planning, thinking about recruitment and retention, your employer branding and your employer offer, wanting to be both a school of choice within your local community, but also an employer of choice as well. So what does that mean there? Also thinking about training and staff development. And certainly that's something that you are readily looking at from the feedback that you gave earlier, which is great. And also thinking about reward and recognition. And again, this is particularly timely given the update that we had on Tuesday in terms of, it would appear, pay certainly for teachers. We are looking at the expected 1% pay increase for teachers. So again, the opportunity to think about how you can meaningfully reward and recognise staff. Some of that will be around pay, of course, but there are lots of different ways and means, pay and non-pay rewards and opportunities to recognise staff, to ensure that staff are engaged and committed, and issues around well-being, that all adds to your offer, all adds to the staff experience, and means that you're better able to retain your staff. So those are the sorts of things that we're going to be looking at, and where we start, Liz, is with workforce planning, isn't it?
Yeah. So workforce planning is obviously a key activity, and it's very much about the right people in the right place. And I guess it's probably one of the HR activities that schools are most familiar with. In recent years, schools have been tackling the challenges of quite difficult budget situations, which have entailed them to think differently about staff, how staff are deployed, and perhaps looking at restructuring, or even in some situations redundancies. So I guess when you're thinking about workforce planning, there's probably again a couple of questions you want to ask yourself. Thinking first about the business critical roles, do you have any vulnerabilities in the way you're currently covering those roles? So if you think about key operational roles, obviously senior leadership team, business manager, core and key staff, do you have those individuals in post? Are you likely to, within the next period of time, see any change in those post holders, which might necessitate you looking again at those roles? Then thinking more widely, more generally, does the wider deployment of staff meet the current and future needs of the school? I think day to day we all get used to working in one way, and sometimes it's useful just to lift your head up, look across the parapet and see, are we doing things in the right way? Could we deploy staff in a better way that's more effective in meeting the needs of students, or equally more effective in the way we use our budgets? And making the optimum use of resources. So really having a look more widely about how your staff are deployed. Obviously we are in challenging financial times, so crucially, is the staffing structure that you currently have financially sustainable, both for this year, next year, but in the longer term as well? Can you carry the staffing structure you've got currently over that medium to long term, or do you need to look at reshaping the way your staff are engaged? And again, as I mentioned earlier, thinking about workforce planning in the context of what changes are on the horizon in terms of both your pupil profile and also your staff profile. So if your school perhaps has a workforce towards the older end of the age spectrum, are you looking at staff who might be looking at retiring or leaving in the medium term? Or equally, if you have a workforce with a younger age profile, could it be that you'll have a number of staff who may be taking time off, time out to have a family, and what will that mean for you and planning ahead in terms of your workforce? Just wanted to note here the importance as part of workforce planning, of keeping any temporary or fixed term contracts you have in place under review. I can't emphasise the importance of this enough in terms of diarising when those contracts are due for a review, and making sure they don't roll on and therefore by default in effect become permanent. So know who you've got on a temporary contract, for what reason they're there, keep that under review, and make sure you're ending contracts in a timely manner if you need to do so. Alongside that, another part of workforce planning and ensuring you have, as Summer mentioned, the agility and the flexibility, is thinking about how you use and deploy any relief or casual staff. Obviously they're great for filling any temporary peaks in workload or covering for absent colleagues, but again it's important to keep those arrangements under review and think about, is it right to be using someone on a long-term relief basis, or maybe do we need to move them across to a temporary contract? Finally, under workforce planning, thinking about alternative models of delivery. So increasingly schools are now working in partnerships, whether that be through formal arrangements, multi-academy trusts, or collaborations. Schools are thinking creatively about how some key roles might be covered across a number of schools. And then alongside that, you might want to think about whether you wish to either insource or outsource certain services. So, for example, catering, cleaning, you may have arrangements with outside contractors that you would like to bring in-house because that would be more cost effective, or likewise you might have in-house arrangements that you're looking to outsource. And again, it's just about thinking what's right for us, what meets the needs of our school, and crucially, what is the most cost-effective way to manage those operations. I can't emphasise enough when you're thinking about workforce planning the need to act early, particularly if you're looking at restructuring. Some of these processes can take a period of time to work through, so it's about looking ahead, acting early, and planning in any of these changes to ensure you can make those in a timely way.
Yeah, and absolutely, as Liz has mentioned, in terms of partnerships, obviously the partnerships that you'll be establishing across schools in terms of collaborations, federating as trusts, and the opportunity to think about collectively recruiting and sourcing knowledge, skills and experience, ergo a staff member, and how you might share that across a number of schools, deploy that resource across a number of schools, and opportunities to think about that. So if you're wanting sort of specialist provision, you might not have the opportunity or the budget to necessarily recruit a speech and language therapist as a dedicated provision within your school full time, but it might be that in terms of linking with your partners, your local neighbours, that you can look to come up with an arrangement where you share a resource amongst you and think about what that looks like and how that might support the needs of your respective schools. So lots to think about in terms of workforce planning, and hopefully some useful information and ideas there. And again, just to reiterate what Liz says in terms of particularly thinking about those temporary contracts, particularly important. On from workforce planning is succession planning, and again this is all about sort of sharing our knowledge and experience with you and helping you to be able to think about these issues within your school. So succession planning leads on from what Liz was talking about and starts to think about specific roles, and what we're looking at here is particularly in terms of critical roles. So what are the critical roles within your organisation, within your schools? What are the critical roles now, and what might be the critical roles going forward as things change in line with your school improvement development plan and where your school is going? And critical roles are those that have the biggest impact and are critical to the school, but are also hard to fill. So I've put a couple of examples up there for you. So it could be a head teacher, or principal, critical role, absolutely, and in some schools, in some local contexts, that could be a hard to recruit post, whether that's in terms of your geography, whether that's in terms of your setting, whatever those issues might be, realising that there's sort of a national issue with teacher recruitment, but in terms of how that plays out for your local school, there could be some particular issues to take account of there. Or continuing with the example of a speech and language therapist, also thinking about any specialist roles that you have that are critical to the impact that you need them to have within your school. They make the biggest impact and are hard to fill. So first thing you want to do, as I say, is identify those critical roles, then think about identifying successors for those roles. And in terms of identifying potential successors, consider options to develop people for those critical roles for the future. So if you know what those critical roles are, you'll have the opportunity to think about who might be best placed to grow into those roles, and the sorts of things that you'll be wanting to review to help inform that thinking will be appraisal review meetings. Who have you got within your school? So again, linking in with those key questions. Are there any individuals in your within your school, within your teams, could extrapolate that out to your wider partnerships, collaborations, trusts, who could be developed to fill those future roles, obviously reflecting on their current performance and skill, and linking with that in terms of identifying sort of talent and identifying individuals. Not only just thinking in terms of technical skill and competence, but also thinking about, do they have the required behaviours and mindset, both to fulfil the role, but also in terms of their ability and willingness, I guess, to develop into those roles. So in terms of appraisal meetings, in terms of one-to-one supervision discussions, have they verbalised an interest in career development, that next step for them, and are keen to develop themselves in that way? If they demonstrated a desire to develop outside of their role. And of course, if those things align together, then you're starting to build up a portfolio of staff, of talent within your schools that you can then look to develop moving forward. And of course, then you have the opportunity to link that in again with the appraisal cycle, and again in terms of the personal development plan. In terms of that, then is linked not only to thinking about the school development plan and improvement plan and the outcomes that the school is working towards, or rather the objectives that the school is working towards, those priorities, but also align the appraisal, align the personal development plan with a view to supporting that succession, with a view to giving them exposure to activities and responsibility that would be incumbent on that next rung up the ladder, to development that is going to support them and best place them to be able to move into those positions going forward. And equally linked to that, thinking about time frames. So when might these individuals be ready? Are we talking about perhaps 6 months time for person A, person B for the particular role that there's an interest in, that we've identified them for? Are we thinking 12 months, 18 months? So again, in terms of that planning and being able to focus on the future and think about, okay, what do we need to put in place to be able to support this person to be ready to step into that role, to be able to support in that particular way, to be agile, to continue using that term, to be able to undertake those responsibilities in the future. And again, just linking there, so identifying talent, addressing development needs, and also the opportunity, if there aren't successors that have been identified, perhaps considering other strategies to ensure that you have the future workforce that you need. And I come back to Liz's point about workforce planning and thinking about those other partnerships, whether that's insourcing, outsourcing, or thinking creatively with your local partners. So hopefully that's helpful in terms of thinking about succession planning. You can do it across the workforce, but I think particularly, and appreciating that time is at a premium, I would be absolutely recommending that you undertake succession planning for critical roles. And again, we're thinking there about those roles that have the biggest impact and those roles that are hard to fill. And what you can then do as we move forward and talk to you about some other strategies is think particularly about how are you going to want to recruit to those. If you need to step outside of your organisation, what does it look like specifically to recruit to those critical roles? And whilst you might have a recruitment strategy, a recruitment process in place, you might need to revisit that on an ad hoc basis if this is a particularly critical role, and you might want to think of perhaps slightly repositioning your offer because of that particular issue. Sorry, I was just ever so slightly distracted there. We've got a pop-up on screen here to say that there are some issues with the audio. There's nothing obvious as to what, if any, issue there might be this end. I certainly hope that you can hear me well enough. Please make a note in the chat box if you are experiencing some difficulties. Certainly you'll get a copy of this presentation after the session, so do bear with us if you are experiencing any problems. So that's a little bit about succession planning. We next move on to recruitment and retention, which links rather nicely to what I've just been talking about there. So in terms of recruitment, we come back to one of you listening in talked about employer branding and thinking about your offer as employers, as schools and academies, and certainly be wanting to think about the school's image and the message that you give out to potential staff. You'll be wanting to think about that both in terms of your actual recruitment policy, in terms of the recruitment documentation, critically the advert, and that links in with attracting the right candidates. But you'll probably also want to think or you might want to think a little bit more broadly in terms of aligning your social media strategy with recruitment, because again you'll want to be demonstrating yourselves, singing yourselves as schools of choice, and I'm sure your social media activity will be demonstrating that for you as you engage with both your parents but also the wider community. There is absolutely the opportunity, and it's actually happening all at the same time, is that you have the opportunity then to engage with potential and prospective recruits. So actually, what are the messages that people are getting from looking at your Twitter page in terms of your approach to teaching and learning, the relationship that you have as staff, the relationship that you have with parents, and they get a really interesting sort of snapshot of what it means to work in your schools. And certainly I'm all over Twitter, so if you want to follow me, I'm at SM_HR TC, and certainly I've followed a number of your schools, and it's lovely to see the sorts of activities that you're doing, and it really does give a very palpable sense then of what it could mean to be working within your organisations. And in terms of aligning that with your recruitment strategy, a lot of your posts are going to be about the activities that you're doing with your children and young people. If you've got a recruitment activity coming up, you might want to switch the narrative just a little bit and be shifting it towards what it means to work within your schools and staffing issues, and so that any new recruits, as well as looking on your website, if they are social media savvy, they'd be able to get a sense of your school environment more broadly and what it means for them as staff members. You'll equally be wanting to think about pay and benefits, and of course that is a topical issue, and if your school are needing to think about your pay policy, and not just because of the 1% pay increase. And just to note that September's webinar will be outlining the new pay terms and conditions document, but if perhaps you're in a situation where you're needing to think a little bit more creatively about how you meaningfully recognise and reward staff, we are offering a pay policy workshop on the 14th of September. You'll find details both on our website and on Kent CPD online, so if that's of interest, have a look. And we can certainly will be helping schools to think about their approach going forward. Also think about recruitment incentives, be thinking about career prospects for staff. So again, I link that back to succession planning, opportunities for development within your schools, across your schools, and you'd be wanting to sing about that, because pay is one part of reward and recognition. Development is another vital part of that, and opportunities for development. And again, thinking about recruiting to those business critical roles. In terms of retention, I think here are a couple of activities that certainly help, and it's about bringing staff on board quickly and through a great induction. So we often talk about recruitment, selection and induction because we want to very much sort of focus on that, and that recruitment extends into the induction process, and obviously wanting to make sure that you're able to bring your new recruits on and into the organisation as swiftly as possible, and that's both in terms of the standards and expectations of the school, that's in terms of sort of the practicalities, but also I think socially as well in terms of the induction, and help them establish themselves within the team.
Yeah, getting that new staff member embedded and being part of the team. Yeah, that's really important.
Absolutely. So think about communication and engagement with staff, and certainly retention and employee engagement are inextricably linked. If you sort of put those search terms into any search engine, you'll see a wealth of research that links those two things together, and equally engagement and communication inextricably linked, and certainly communication in its broadest sense. So we're thinking about the opportunity for communication top down, bottom up. We're thinking about recognising individual contributions and feedback on performance. I think also thinking about keeping work rewarding and interesting, and again I think there's the opportunity to link that back to appraisal, and when thinking about objectives and thinking about the individual, the opportunity to align performance objectives both to the school, and clearly that's going to be the school improvement, school development plan, but also aligning those objectives to the individual staff member, their strengths, their skills, their motivations, and their aspirations, again linking with succession planning. And you know, if there's the opportunity to align those two things as closely as possible, then certainly everybody's going to be all the more engaged and support the school's drive moving forward. Developing individuals, I think that goes without saying, and also a focus on well-being, and certainly that's an area where there's lots of work being undertaken by lots of schools. There's lots of focus nationally by any number of organisations, think tanks and professional bodies in the importance of looking at wellbeing, and certainly if that's something that you're wanting to focus on, then we'd be only too happy to be involved in those conversations with you and support you with that moving forward. So that's a little bit about recruitment and retention, and I guess that links nicely with the next one that I'm going to talk to you about, an outline for you in terms of training and staff development. So just to reiterate, I think it's really good if we're able to align training and development to both the organisation in terms of the school improvement or development plan, succession plan, as well as the individual in terms of their role, their aspirations, motivation, and I suppose relatedly career path, and be able to bring those things together. So that's certainly something that I would recommend, and something that we talk about on our appraisal training. The other thing that I think it's useful to think about in terms of training and development, and I don't know if people are familiar with this, so feel free to ask questions and share your thoughts in the chat box, is the notion of the 70-20-10 principle. Excuse me. The school of thought here is that actually in terms of development there are a wealth of opportunities, sort of 70% as it were, and we're not looking strictly at numbers, but it's more a sense of sort of proportionality, that you know the vast majority of our learning and development can come through experience. Okay, so learning and developing through experience. So the sorts of things that we could be looking at here is the opportunity for individuals to develop themselves through expanding the scope of their work. So that could be taking on new responsibilities, that could be substituting for a manager in meetings, taking on managerial responsibilities. It could be learning through solving real life problems. That could be participating in group projects, looking at sort of particular initiatives. It could be learning on the job, essentially. And linked to that sort of that notion of learning through new experiences. So it could be covering for others while they're on leave, it could be gaining exposure to other departments or roles, taking on new projects and initiatives, and there's a whole host of other examples. And if you Google 70-20-10, there's any number of helpful articles on this area. The 20 is about learning and developing through others, or because I like my frameworks and I like a little bit of alliteration, I've used the E of exposure to sit alongside the E of experience there. So the learning through others could be about feedback, it could be around having 360-degree feedback and learning through that, reviewing one's own practice and planning for development moving forward. It could be through structured mentoring or coaching, it could be through job shadowing, it could be through networking on a local basis, on an online basis in terms of social media. It could be through participating in learning groups and forums locally or nationally. Lots of different ways in which folks can learn through exposure. Certainly teachers are all over Pinterest, so I hear, and the opportunity to gain ideas for displays, for activities, and a whole wealth of sharing that goes on through those forums. So the 20 there being learning and developing through others. And the 10 being learning and developing through structured courses, and of course we support in a big way here in terms of E of education, so thinking about courses, e-learning, workshops, seminars. I suppose these webinars even form part of that principle, and we're really glad that you've been able to join us both today, and I notice a number of people that have joined us. I think you're frequent flyers who have attended pretty much throughout the year, and we're very grateful for that, and we hope that you found these sessions useful. Moving on from training and staff development then, because I could absolutely wax lyrical on this topic, it is my favourite thing of all, but noting that we've only got 15 minutes left, I should probably allow Liz to start talking about reward and recognition. So over to you, Liz.
Yeah, so the final HR strategy we're just going to highlight for you is that relating to reward and recognition. And I think quite often when we think about reward, we do think quite narrowly in terms of pay awards, pay increases. And of course they have their place and a very important place. But as school budgets become more challenging and it becomes harder to give those larger pay awards that you may have given in the past, it's about thinking more creatively about how you recognise and reward your staff. As you're probably aware, in terms of pay, the past 4 or 5 years have seen quite a significant change in the landscape around pay, and schools now have far more flexibility and scope for discretion in terms of how they reward both their support and their teaching staff, whether that be in terms of starting salaries or the yearly pay award. Schools now have discretion to determine what that is at a local level. But of course all schools are working within a limited budget, so it's about thinking more creatively about reward and perhaps non-pay initiatives where you're recognising staff in other ways, and kind of things that you might want to think of along those lines might be an employee recognition scheme whereby you have an employee or a team of the month who get that extra recognition, that extra thank you for a job well done. So recognising that we can't reward in monetary terms, but a thank you, goes some way to show the appreciation. I guess on the side there you've got a number of sort of questions you might want to ask yourself. What incentives do you currently have in place? How do employees respond to those incentives? Is there anything else you could be doing? Any formal schemes you might want to put in place in terms of recognising employees, or equally informal. Anecdotally, from colleagues here, quite often a thank you is appreciated as much as anything more formal. So it's just thinking about more creatively about how you show your appreciation. So there's some food for thought really around reward and recognition, but just be mindful that it's more than what do I get in my pay packet at the end of the month, and is there anything you can be doing more as a school to really demonstrate how you appreciate your staff.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the opportunity to link back to development and opportunities for development. So, yeah, thinking far more broadly than monetary terms. Just as we sort of approach the last 10 minutes of our webinar, we're just going to refer back to our cyclical model. So we've talked about forecasting, we've talked about current capabilities, we've talked about identifying the gap, we've talked about some of the HR strategies and activities that you might be wanting to think about, to review, to develop, and we now sort of come well, it's not really full circle because it's an ongoing process, but the next stage in that model is the planning and implementation of change, and Liz has some very sage advice on this point.
Yeah, so whatever strategy, whatever HR strategy you are looking at and thinking of, I guess it's critical that you consider the lead-in times for implementing those. Quite often change can take time, and it's important to get the planning process right and work through the stages of implementation. Critically, in a school, when you're looking at certain changes, they might maybe to HR policy, or whether you're looking at a restructure, those changes are likely to need governing body sign-off to make sure your governors are on board with that, and equally the buy-in of other members of the senior leadership team. So it's about allowing time for that process to take place. Looking at restructures and redundancies as an example, you'll see on the right there's a suggested timescale for the implementation of a restructure activity, and as you can see, in terms of the duration, the change actually takes place over a number of months, through from December right through to September the following year. So it's very much about allowing time to get through the stages of whatever change activity you are looking at. And of course, with certain change activities, you need to be really mindful of notice periods. As you might be aware, for teachers, there are only 3 points in the year when they can leave employment or be made redundant, or when you can effect a change, and you need to make sure you give appropriate notice of that. So whatever change activity you're looking at, whether it's a restructure or a recruitment exercise, you need to be mindful of when are those deadlines, when do we need to hit those deadlines for implementing certain stages of the process. Just to add there, that if you work with the consultancy team, we can help you and support you in terms of working up timelines for any proposed change activity to make sure you're hitting those key deadlines in the way that you need to implement change at the date you're planning. And we would certainly be happy to work with you on working up those timelines.
Lovely, thanks Liz. So that is sort of our model. What we've got for you now, and I hope that's been useful, what we've got for you now is a quick sort of précis of the key HR activities that you'll be undertaking or looking to undertake, and we've put it on screen there so that you have sight of that at a quick glance, as it were. So the opportunity for you to just take a couple of minutes to have a look at that. Of course, you're going to have a copy of the slide sent to you afterwards. But you can see there we've split it into sort of activities that you'll undertake on an annual basis, monthly, termly, things that you might need to do on a more regular basis in response to presenting issues and needs, and those activities that absolutely are ongoing, and that's mostly sort of your HR casework activities, so managing absence, grievance, disciplinary issues, etc.
And I think it can be a real challenge for people when you're working day to day and you're dealing with those ongoing issues to actually be able to draw breath and go, okay, what do we need to think about a month ahead, a term ahead, a year ahead? So hopefully that checklist or that chart will give you kind of an indication of what you might be needing to think about and when, really.
Yeah. So you've got that to have a look at over the next, 10 days before the school bell rings to see out this year. What we're going to have for you, and you can tell my volume's gone up because I'm really excited about this next bit. I was just very aware that I'm probably projecting. I've gone into movie mode. So really excited. What we have for you come September, which takes our chart there by far a stage further, is we are making available to schools a HR health check. Not just any old HR health check, it's going to be an online resource for you to be able to visit our website, get online, and to be able to review your HR practices in school. And as it says there, and as you can tell by my voice, we are absolutely passionate about the value of effective HR and the impact that it can have for you and your schools. And what we're offering you is a free and interactive HR health check that's going to enable you to assess the effectiveness of your current HR practices. And you'll see that there are a number of benefits there. And did I say that it was free? I hope I did. So that's going to be good. It's going to be quick and easy to use. You're going to be able to assess 11 areas of HR practice, 11 and counting. We've already got plans to add to that as the years go by, but certainly 11 areas of practice. And what you'll get as a result of undertaking the review is a summary report which will help identify areas of strength and areas of development and areas that you'll want to focus on, helping you to prioritise, as we talked about right at the beginning of the session, in terms of helping you to move forward. It's going to be available free to all schools, so rest assured you'll have the opportunity to have a look at this, and then absolutely the opportunity for you on the basis of that health check, on the basis of your results, we can absolutely work with you to help you prioritise to move your HR practice forward. And I am so excited. It's been a real labour of love for both myself and Liz. It's being built, so you've got a screenshot there. There's lots more to it than that, but I didn't want to give too much away at this stage. We will be trialling it the first couple of weeks of September. I say trialling it, it will be in existence. It will be more just doing the final stages of system testing. If anybody has a particular interest and is excited as I am and wants to be part of that, then just make a note in that chat box and say that, yes please, yes me, and I'll happily get in contact with you and make it available to you. Yes, lots of you, so that's really good, that's really good, yay! We'll make it available to you early doors, and you can help us just do that very last bit of testing. Liz and I are going to be playing about with this system all through the summer, which is equally exciting, but you can help us with that last bit of testing before we release it out to schools properly. So that's great, and everybody, I think, without fail, has said yes please. So that's blooming marvellous, frankly. So thank you. Okay, so finally, please stay with us, don't anybody log off just yet. And finally, so future webinars, and I'm so pleased that we've been able to offer these out to schools. When I first had this idea, I didn't quite know how it was going to pan out. I'm just really pleased that we're now in July and we've still got people signing up. In fact, I've got people that have already signed up for terms 1 and 2, and you can see the subjects that we've got on offer for you the first part of next year. They are available to sign up, so if you haven't already, visit our website and you can register for those. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for being part of this, and I hope that you'll continue to do so. And in fact, those of you that have joined us for a good number of sessions, I know after each of these webinars you get issued with a quick evaluation form, more of a sort of tick box, give your immediate thoughts. If anyone is so inclined to offer a bit more of a testimonial, a bit more of a narrative about how you found our webinars, and would feel able to email that to me. If you don't want to be named, that's fine. We can share it as an anonymous testimonial. Because I'm going to be looking to launch the marketing for next year's webinars, and it's always lovely to have, you know, the real life comments and hopefully compliments of yourself. So if anybody feels able to do that, then I'd certainly welcome it, and thank you in advance. So those are our future webinars. Our training for terms 1 and 2 next year is live online, so please go and check that out if that's of interest for yourselves or colleagues. And well, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for joining us through the year. Yeah, nearly there, folks.
Have a lovely summer break if you're off. If you're working through the summer break, I hope you enjoy some good quality downtime, and we'll see you back in September.
We will indeed. Second Wednesday of the month. #Webinar Wednesdays. Hurrah. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.